Washington, D.C. right now, Republicans don't really get to set the agenda because they've lost the White House and the Senate and the House. Their agenda is just to oppose everything President Biden wants. But in the states, where they do get to write the laws, they've been focusing on restricting voting, seen a lot of those, banning health care for transgender youth and trans participation in sports. And now the latest project they're working on is banning critical race theory in schools. Critical race theory, the study of the structural roots of American racial hierarchy and its legacy. Several states have introduced bills to this effect. Last week, the Republican-dominated Oklahoma State House passed a bill that prohibits the teaching of critical race theory. Idaho's governor just signed a bill banning critical race theory in schools. Also last week, during debate about a bill that would ban schools from teaching, quote, divisive concepts about race and sex, one Louisiana Republican said, and I quote, "If you were having a discussion on whatever the case may be on slavery, then you can talk about everything dealing with slavery, the good, the bad, the ugly." Before he was reminded there was no good to slavery and walked it back. During a similar debate today, a Republican member of the Tennessee state legislature gave an unwitting lesson in the importance of accurately and rigorously teaching the real history of slavery and racial oppression in the United States.
The Three-Fifths Compromise was a direct effort to ensure that southern states never got the population necessary to continue the practice of slavery everywhere else in the country. What does that mean? Appropriation based on population. That's how we pick. Everybody in here knows we've got nine state representatives. By limiting the number of population in the count, they specifically limited the number of representatives that would be available in the slave-holding states, and they did it for the purpose of ending slavery well before Abraham Lincoln, well before a civil war. Do we talk about that? I don't hear that anywhere in this conversation across the country.
I mean, look, it's a complicated history, the Three-Fifths Compromise. It's true that a bunch of folks on the other side of the compromise were trying to limit the representational power of the slave states. But it's also unquestionably like a moral stain on the Constitution that explicitly said slaves counted less than any other person. In fact, didn't even use the word slave, which was an indicator at the time that everyone then knew enough to be morally embarrassed by what they were doing. This fight against teaching America's racist past has now been integrated into the broader Republican cancel culture wokeness moral panic being stoked with Joe Biden in office. And since he's a less appealing target than other recent Democratic presidents for, who knows what reason, Mitch McConnell and his party decided the biggest threat to America is white people finding out America's institutions are racist. Last time we visited the Tennessee State House, it was to speak to State Representative London Lamar about the Republican push to keep a bust of one of the founders of the KKK in the state rotunda. She joined us from in front of that bust. She's back tonight after having debated Tennessee's proposed law banning critical race theory. State Representative London Lamar, welcome to you. My understanding, Representative, is that you were on the floor for this debate, and I'm just curious what it was like to be in that room, what that debate was like, your reaction to your colleagues' monologue on the Three-Fifths Compromise.
It was a very intense conversation because it's uncomfortable for Republicans to talk about race. And in their attempt to not be held accountable for the historical implications of racism in this country is just unfathomable. I spoke on the floor today because the House sponsor said in his debates on this bill that an anonymous young white girl felt trauma because she felt like an oppressor based on the history of white America and what we've done regarding slavery. And while I don't want any child to feel any sort of trauma, I took this opportunity to bring to light the trauma that Black people feel living in America. Black children grow up knowing their whole American history, that the majority of the American history that we live today is of Black people being slaves. Or that more recently, our grandparents' whole lives were living through the civil rights movement, where they had to drink from colored water fountains, where they couldn't vote, where they were being lynched, where they were being killed, where they were being denied housing, food, and other basic necessities. And most importantly, our whole criminal justice system in America was built on the oppression and the systematic criminalization of Black people. So no, we can't just scapegoat or whitewash history so those white Americans now don't have to feel the repercussions of 400 plus years of enslavement and what that's done to a disadvantaged population such as mine. What we have to do is have these conversations in educational settings to bring context to our students so that we can remember what happened in American history so we won't repeat the horrible things that happened in American history. And my colleagues' comments today brings light to the fact that we need to continue to teach about the history of America regarding racism, because he was actually incorrect. The 3/5 Compromise was created so that Southern states can have more representation in Congress. So they counted 3 per 5 slaves. They counted them as 3 persons. So we obviously need to continue to talk about race because the Republicans are not even clear on what the issues of the 3/5 Compromise or other racism issues in America are. And they had the audacity to clap for it, and it was wrong. So we have a problem here. And the fact that we're trying to change laws in order to not have a conversation about race is just wrong and is downright offensive.
One thing that I'm having a hard time with this, and I was going through a little bit of the bill language today. So, I've seen examples of different, some text in critical race theory that has characterizations that I think are poorly worded or maybe oversimplified, like anything, right? But I don't even get the category. Like, if you're going to say we're not going to do this thing, what is the category of the thing? Critical race theory is an extremely amorphous term that's been used in all kinds of ways. Like, do you have an understanding of what it would actually mean for what curricula, what lessons can or can't be taught in your state schools?
I was trying to say they don't even know what critical race theory is. They don't even have a clear understanding of what that actually looks like. Right now, these standards are put in place based on members that the governor appoints. So we already have a partisan governor, which can put in members who are already partisan to decide the standards that are taught in our children's education. Now, he referenced standards such as teaching about Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and Diane Nash. And there are important stories to tell, but they are not putting in place standards that allow us to talk about the full context of why these particular issues are going on. They want these conversations to be limited, very surface level, and will not allow teachers to go to in-depth conversations. And I brought this issue up is that the fact that teachers who actually lived through the civil rights movement will be limited to talk about their lived experiences. People like my grandmother, who I stay with now and look at every day, had to drink from a colored water fountain. She was discriminated against, such as many Americans who are still living to this day. And so to limit educators and people's ability in our education system to have conversations about race when we are still living in a society that I would say still has systemic racial implications going on in laws is problematic. So using the word critical race theory and all of these other acronyms, if they don't even understand themselves, is to me a opportunity for them not to be held accountable to the history of what white America has done to Black people. And no, we're not trying to make you be oppressor. We're not trying to call you oppressor, as the sponsor said, and we're not trying to act as victims. What we truly want is to look at what has happened in history, right, make it better so that we can move forward.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.